Hello everyone, today I wanted to go over a bit more detail on how to make caves. I already showed you how to go in and create the little visibility thing. So you go into your texture, your material, and you need to go into the master material specifically. Then you need to right click and create landscape visibility mask. And then you need to connect that to the opacity mask. And once that's connected, you can go into the landscape mode, click visibility, and then once you left click, it will make the area transparent. If you want to get rid of the grass and everything, you just need to paint over one that does not have grass on it. So now with that hole in there, we can go ahead and start designing our little cave. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower this top part a little bit. I don't want this to be massive entrance. There we go. All right, so from here, I can go in and go to manage, and I'm going to create a second landscape. So with my second landscape, I want to use this separate material, one that'll fit a bit more of that cave feeling. So you want to find one that's a bit more cave feeling if you're wanting to go the landscape route. If you don't, you're going to have to use a lot of models to make the floor, or you're going to have to create a tube for tunnel itself. So I'm going to create a 2x2. There we go, that's plenty to work with the small cave. So I'm going to lower it down a bit to where it kind of matches along the floor here, and I'm going to hit create. So there we go. Now we've got a little landscape. I'm going to paint stone along it because I want it to kind of turn into an area that the kind of blends together. So that's cliff. That's not what we're looking for. Stones. There we go. So I'm going to grow this all the way across. And now for my actual landscape, I need to find a way to kind of blend them together. So what I want to do is I want to kind of go into my foliage, and I want to go to the grass that I'm using for the other landscape. And I'm going to kind of paint a bit of fake grass into the area to sort of hide it all, hide the transition a bit. So that transition's a little bit slower. And so I want to go into the one that I'm using here, and I want to kind of use a bit of ground. I want to slightly paint into it. This looks like it's a little bit over the ground, and that's kind of where some of the mishap is. So there we go. Now we've got this. Now I need to kind of sculpt the landscape to fit a little bit better. So sculpt, bring down the strength a lot, hold shift click to go down. There we go. So now we need to go down further as we get out here. And this is where we're going to use the flatten tool to kind of go down out here. Kind of just keep everything else lower than the regular dirt is outside. So there we go. So now we just need to work on blending this a little bit better. So when I go back into paint, I need to create a bit more brush fall off and weaken that strength a little bit. I think long to give a slow feel of transition. Now I need to go into my dirt itself, the ground I'm using, and because my grass is so much darker than it, I need to go into the color. You can use the texture to do it too. Kind of darken it till it fits a bit better. So I need to find the texture because that's not working. Soil. There we go. So now I've loaded up the texture. I can go down to the brightness and lower that a little bit. There we go. That's too far. 0.75. There we go. That's a much nicer blend. A little bit more wouldn't hurt. So with the landscape fitting here, I kind of want it to look a bit cleaner. So I need to do a bit more work on sculpting it to kind of fit more. So there we've got grass here and there. We need a bit more ground here and there too. So now we've got some dirt going along. So now it's a lot harder to tell that it's transitioned. Way to further is now we can go into our rocks, and we can actually find some rocks that'll fit for the little edge here. But once we start placing these, the seams will kind of be a lot harder to notice. So of course we would go along the entire edge here and replace every little bit with these rocks to kind of hide the cliff's face right there. And there's a bunch of different things you can do. If you have bottoms to your rock, you can flip them over. This one does not. But I can turn it and kind of use it however I want. So right here, I'm going to set it there and I'm going to grow it. So there we go. And we can do tons of little different shapes in order to really blend it in. Here and there. There we go. So we've got this little rock line built. And you're starting to notice that it's really hard to tell where it transitions now. Of course, I need to go in and edit the rock material texture on here. There we go. Dirt stone mix. So we need to grab a dirt stone mix because it's a little too bright, so 0.75. And we need to slightly edit it to where it matches the regular landscape a bit better. So we need to kind of lower it down. Maybe lower the saturation a little bit. And work it until it really blends in a bit better. There we go. That's a bit nicer. Now I need to kind of mix the ground to where it does the same thing. So there we go. Now we've gotten it working a lot nicer. And of course it's just smoothing and sculpting it to where it all just feels more natural from here. And of course, if we find areas that don't fit anymore, we can just go in and paint the visibility out because now we've got a landscape over it. And just like that, we've created a mostly seamless little transition into a cave entrance. All right, and then so all we need to do now is go down here, grass dot flush cache. Now we've done that, it'll reload all the grass. So it looks like we've still got a little spot right here that needs to be swapped. So paint, landscape 1, river dirt, and we'll paint there. Now we will rerun the cache. Looks like a bit more. And then, of course, if we've got anything that's kind of been painted onto the floating areas, we can undo it, lower the density a bit because we got the little bits of dirt here. So there we go. Now we've got a full-blown little seamless transitioned area from our regular landscape to the new one. And of course, there's still going to be a bit of smoothing here and there to really get it to kind of smoothly transition in. So there we go. Now we've got the little area where it's kind of hard to tell where it changes landscapes unless you know that it's there. All right, so now we're going to go over to the landscape 2 and we're going to kind of smooth out the area a bit, make it a bit easier to work with. So now we can actually go ahead and since we've got these landscapes being used, we can actually use their rocks as well now too. Cool, they have a cliff. There we go, we got a little cliff right there. So now we can kind of work them together to create a nice transitioned cave entrance by turning the rocks and doing all sorts of other stuff to get them to fit. Does this one have a bottom? It does. That makes things a lot easier. So with the ones at the bottom, we can actually just straight up flip them over and then use them that way too. So here's our little cave entrance. We've done a lot of work placing things around. There's some pretty decent little transitioning work going on by placing the rocks in just the way that they wouldn't stick through or anything. Of course, there's still more work to be done, like a couple of rocks here and there that still need to be placed, but you get the idea of how this works. You place the rocks around and you build an area that's your little cave entrance using your more detailed rocks in order to fill it out instead of just using the flat landscape pieces. So yeah, that's really how you get this transition from the entrance into the further on caves. So when you're building caves, it's harder to do it with free assets, but if you can get a pack with some good cliffs, like Megascans used to have some pretty decent ones, but they're no longer free. Yeah, so just finding a good set of rocks that will work together with your landscape to build a decent little cave entrance is really all you need. And then you build that little cave. And if you don't have anything fancy, that's fine. These cliff walls will do just fine. You'll just have to have some basic style rocks to cover in the little gaps in the hole. But yeah, there we go. That's how I got my little cave going. There's my full-blown entrance built in. And of course, I could keep going with the detail, really building out this area over here. Really selling that cave really powerfully. And I could even go further and go to my meshes, my ivy. And I could drop a few bit of vines here and there to really sell this area. Looks like I need to move this rock a little bit over. Now I can just go into paint, landscape 1, visibility, and just, that's simply shrinking it down and finding areas that I need to paint over. There we go. And then it's really just building the inside of the cave. So yeah, here we go. Here's our little entrance. We've got our landscape 1 and landscape 2 working together. So now when you're walking on through, you won't notice that. There's a really good chance you won't notice that you won't see the differences. Like I said, if you really wanted to be specific, you could just make sure that there's one solid line of grass along where it changes. Especially if it's a grassy little area. And then the areas you don't want to put grass, you can switch to putting stones along the floor. Like if I went to the landscape, went to the foliage pack, went to meshes, and then rocks. And I looked at static meshes. I could place some rocks along here as well. Even like really flat ones. And that'll not only add little areas to hide the landscape transition, it'll add a bit of depth to the level instead of keeping it flat. And then right here where it's transitioning, because I use this rock over here on the other side of the cliff, I can kind of draw along the edge and really hide that transition seam. So where it's hard to get away from it at, like over here, I could just take this cliff right here and duplicate it around. And I could slide it on in over here. And now it's a little rock that helps transition it over. And to kind of hide it a bit better, you can even take this rock and lay it in other little spots too, to kind of create a bumpy area that kind of hides that you're using it for that. But you don't really have to, as most players won't notice that in the first place. There are some that will, but most players won't even notice that you've done this. They'll just see a cave that they can enter and they'll head on over there. But yeah, if you look just straight on at it, if you didn't know that I had 2 landscapes there, you wouldn't even second guess. You just see, okay, so there's a slightly irregular sculpt right there. And that's because I haven't fully perfected getting it right here, because that takes a little bit of practice, trial and error. And there we go. So yeah, that's how you get that like smooth transition between it, is you actually have to build a little area entrance for your cave. You can't just put a hole in there and expect to call it good. Now, that does work in more simplistic art styled games, so don't think that that just cuts you out just because you don't have these rocks. So yeah, from here, I would just kind of take things like this rock and build a whole path. And it would be no different than building a building with rocks. But I would have the landscape be the floor, and I can use that to kind of guide the player so they have locations they can travel along. And I can use ramp and all the other tools to kind of sculpt the landscape into the pathing system I want to use. And from there, it's really just customizing it and designing it into what you want it to be. So if I wanted this to just be a cave entrance with a little fireplace and everything, I could take everything right here. I could duplicate it a little bit further in. And of course, to hide all that, I could easily just go back to landscape 1 and just sculpt this over it. Because there's a lot you got to do to get these caves to look proper and not just blow out. So there we go. That's how you get a little seamless cave in here. Of course, you can scale up some rocks and stuff. As long as you don't go overboard, their textures will look fine. And you just got to really pay attention and make sure you're not making the rocks and stuff go outside of the landscape that's above it. So I've got this little gap on the rock right there, so I can kind of slide it on over and use that as my little miniature roof right here to get an area where they have to kind of get lower to the ground to come across. And then once again, I can take these cliffs and duplicate them down, angle them over. And there we go. Now we have this fully functional little cave over here. If we put a little rock, a little light inside of it, now I've got this fully functional area down here. It works as a cave, and as long as you're willing to put in the effort, you can keep it going as far along as you want. And then once you get to a point where the cave is usable, work with your little render settings to make it to where the cave never is active until the player can see it. So that way it despawns whenever the player doesn't see it and can't access it. That'll help you with your load times and renders. Rendering live time in real time. And it'll keep it as this beautiful area the player can visit and use. Yeah, from here it would just be laying out the smaller rocks so that way you don't always have these big rocks, because the big rocks just need to be used for the walls. If you really want to get the detail in there, you need to use the big rocks and then merge a few of the smaller rocks in there. So I could take like this rock and kind of lean it against it. If I make it a tad bit bigger, as long as I don't go for the full scale, it'll keep some of that detail that was lost earlier. Then of course I could lay out the little rocks down here. As long as I keep it up and going, I can do a lot of different things with this. Everything just starts working together. There's no moss on these rocks, so easy way to fix that would be for what I've got in here. I could go to my meshes and I could go to my ivy and really kind of just hide the lack of green on these by adding some manual green myself. There we go. And then some vines along here. And of course, I can go in and turn off the moss on these rocks as well, if I really wanted to. And that'll help them really blend together with the other rocks. And then it's editing the textures to kind of match together again. If I go into the rock here, I have the tint right here. If I go down and then darken it, I'll raise it up a tiny bit. Then lower this, raise the saturation a little bit. Nah. So it looks like it needs a bit of blue. There you go, that's a bit better. Looks like it's kind of grown too much. Yeah, it's really just doing all that together. Because this is such a small rock normally, it's kind of looking weird because it's been scaled up so much. There we go, now we turn it that way. And normally you don't have a light this strong just sitting on there. And you still, of course, have to do little edits on here. There we go. So now it's blending in really well together. We've got a fully functional little cave. And this could be used in an entire game. And then it's as simple as if I hide this and I hide this, I can look at all these and I can just grab all of the rocks. That's everything. So now I can right click, level, create level instance, or I could create packed level actor. I can name it cave. And there we go. So now I've got a cave. So yeah, that's how we go ahead and create a little cave. So yeah, that's how we create a cave and make a little entrance for it and everything. You could even use this same material for your cave as long as it's got ways to paint into it. So if I hold shift, hit 2, and I look at my paint, I don't really have a fantastic ground that would work with it. But if you just find a material that has a gravel pack, a gravel set or rock set, you can swap it out. So if I wanted to go through and grab my wall material for the auto, I could use that and add it in as another paint and use that to paint my rocks along the floor. And that would really allow me to use this one material to make both landscapes and kind of sculpt out the landscape and make it easily seamless transition using that. Because then I could paint the grass down and then a swap over to the rocks seamlessly. So yeah, that's just a simple way to go through. I know it takes a bit of effort, but making a cave does take a little bit of effort. And you would just have to make multiple entrances if you wanted to go through and go to another side. So yeah, I hope you all learned something. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you are able to use this in order to create your own beautiful little caves. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video and I hope to see you next time. Have a good night.